They're investing close to $1 billion and adding 5,000 new jobs in 2025. This move shatters rumors about plant closures and offshoring. So, what's driving GE to double down on U.S. production right now? Yes, tariffs on steel, aluminum, and components have raised costs by roughly 15 to 20%. But GE Aerospace is investing nearly $1 billion to modernize its U.S. facilities. How? By using automation, streamlining supply chains, and leveraging government support programs. More than that, the Made in America label is a strategic asset, safeguarding GE's global reputation and competitiveness. They know cost alone doesn't tell the whole story. Innovation speed, quality control, and supply chain reliability are just as critical. This commitment allows GE to respond quickly to market changes and reduce risks associated with long-distance supply chains. Local manufacturing also boosts collaboration between teams, leading to faster innovation cycles. GE understands that offshore production can introduce hidden costs, such as delays and quality issues, which can outweigh upfront savings. By investing in U.S. facilities, GE is building a more resilient and agile manufacturing network. That's why they're committing big to domestic manufacturing instead of moving offshore. While many companies chase cheaper labor in Mexico or Asia, GE is bucking that trend. They plan to hire 5,000 workers in 2025 to meet production growth and keep supply chains stable. Making products close to market cuts transport costs and delivery times and improves quality oversight. GE also benefits from a local ecosystem of suppliers, training centers, and skilled workers. This investment not only supports their operations, but helps strengthen the U.S. industrial base sustainably. In fact, by investing locally, GE contributes to a robust manufacturing hub that encourages innovation clusters and fosters industry collaboration. Higher energy costs are a challenge, but GE's modernization efforts include adopting energy-efficient technologies to help offset these expenses. This commitment underscores the company's belief that long-term sustainability outweighs short-term savings from relocating abroad. Expanding production means thousands of new jobs. Good news in regions still facing economic challenges. GE's commitment goes beyond hiring. They offer training programs to prepare workers for high-tech manufacturing. This boosts productivity and helps retain talent. Local communities tied to GE plants benefit from economic stability and growth. Keeping jobs reduces social pressures like poverty and migration. It's a clear example of corporate social responsibility in action. GE Healthcare faces about $500 million in annual losses from retaliatory tariffs. Yet, they're investing in domestic manufacturing instead of relocating overseas. Advanced tech, efficient processes, and tight supply chain control help lower long-term costs. Protecting intellectual property and being agile in the market reduces disruption risks. GE's approach is a big-picture strategy, balancing cost, reputation, and sustainability. They're facing global trade challenges head-on with smart investments. Keeping high-tech production in the U.S. protects sensitive products like aircraft engines and medical equipment. Less long-distance shipping cuts. Greenhouse gas emissions, supporting environmental goals. Domestic plants can apply stronger environmental standards. These benefits create a competitive advantage as businesses face increasing pressure on security and sustainability. In short, GE's nearly $1 billion investment and 5,000 new jobs highlight that innovation, quality, and responsibility drive today's manufacturing, not just cost-cutting. This is a powerful signal about the future of American industry, one that's worth your attention.
The international credit agency Moodys downgraded the U.S.'s credit rating from its highest AAA rating to AA1.
Rick, there are so many things that are swirling around this. We know about the Moodys downgrade. We know that that raises some concerns about
budget. I would hope that the Moodys message and some of the agita that the media expressed when it occurred.
Did you know? The U.S. government's annual interest expenses have soared to a staggering $870 billion. And Moody's just downgraded America's sovereign credit rating from AA to AA1, the last step before losing top-tier status altogether. What do you think this signals for the world's largest economy? U.S. credit downgrade and debt inflation strategy. In May 2025, Moody's downgraded the U.S. credit rating. Why? Because interest costs are soaring, expected to consume nearly 30% of the federal budget by 2035, triple today's share. Imagine how much is left for education, healthcare, and development with such huge interest payments. The Treasury Secretary announced no spending cuts but plans to let inflation erode the debt. Sounds clever, but risky. Real GDP growth is only 1.1%, while inflation hits 4.2%. This means bondholders get paid, but the real value of the dollar is shrinking. Confidence in U.S. bonds may waver, pushing yields up and making borrowing ever more expensive. This could be the vicious cycle America is facing. Rising bond yields, USD decline, and China's retreat. Long-term bond yields have surged past 5%, folks. This shows growing investor anxiety. They demand higher returns to protect their money from losing value. Did you know? In just 1 month, the US dollar has lost nearly 4% of its value. A shocking figure. This not only spikes import costs, but also pushes domestic inflation higher, putting huge pressure on consumers and the overall US economy. Even more surprising, China, the US's largest creditor for 20 years, is quietly pulling back. They've slashed their US bond holdings to $765 billion and shifted to short-term investments to avoid long-term risks amid global turmoil. What if other investors follow suit? The US bond market would face massive pressure, yields would skyrocket, and borrowing costs for the US government would spiral out of control. This could force budget cuts on vital programs or tax hikes, directly hitting economic growth. But it doesn't stop there. This mass retreat could trigger a domino effect, shaking the entire global financial system. Not just the US, but the whole world would feel the impact. Do you think the US can escape this dangerous spiral? Or is this the warning sign of a new global financial crisis? Gold prices surge, allies reject trade demands, and Fed may need to intervene. Gold prices have soared past $3,200 per ounce, with experts forecasting a rise to $4,000 by 2026. This clearly signals investors seeking safe havens away from US dollar risks. As for trade allies, they're no longer accepting tough demands as before. These shifts erode trust and create turmoil in international markets. So, the big question: who will buy new US debt if this continues? If countries stop buying, the Fed will have to step in, buying government bonds to stabilize the market. But you know what that means. More money supply, heavier inflation pressure, further dollar devaluation, and a threat to America's global economic standing. Do you think the US can escape this predicament? The Abe credit rating, the symbol of financial safety, is now gone. Bond yields are rising sharply, inflation outpaces real growth, and major investors like China are steadily retreating from the US debt market.
Well, it is going to be crushing. He sparked a trade war. I talked to farmers who are still digging out from the tragedy that was, and now they're looking at it again.
Right. Are you angry?
It's difficult to be angry on somebody else's behalf.
So it's not about you, it's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax.
But as we think about the farmers and the headwinds that they face, I can think of a number of them: fertilizer costs, fuel costs, labor shortages.
$27 billion is the value of U.S. agricultural exports to China in 2024. But in just 1 week, soybean exports dropped 50% and pork fell 72%. Why is this largest market pulling back? What consequences will American farmers face? The hardship of American farmers and China's strategic shift. In 2024, China imported $27 billion worth of U.S. agricultural products, making up the majority of the country's total agricultural exports. However, as tariffs increased sharply, everything changed rapidly. Within a single week, soybean exports to China fell by 50% and pork by 72%. This is not just a number. It represents a real crisis for American farmers. Inventories piled up unsold, prices plummeted, forcing many to suffer heavy losses and even face bankruptcy risks. Why did China withdraw? They quickly shifted to other partners. Brazil became the new largest soybean supplier, with forecasts of over 31 million tons imported just in the second quarter of 2025. China also invested heavily in Brazil's port infrastructure and signed long-term contracts with Argentina and several other South American countries. This is not a temporary reaction, but a long-term strategy to reduce dependence on U.S. agricultural products. Impact in the U.S. and political reactions. The direct consequence of losing the Chinese market is massive economic damage on U.S. soil. In states like Iowa, farmers reported losses of more than $25 per acre. Total damages run into millions of dollars regionally, severely affecting the livelihoods of thousands of families. Not only farmers, but related industries, such as agricultural equipment, feed stores, and machinery repair services, are also seriously impacted. Many small businesses are forced to scale down and workers are laid off. Politically, pressure from this crisis is causing lawmakers to consider proposals to limit the president's unilateral tariff powers. The goal is to avoid uncontrolled market fluctuations that severely harm agriculture. Widespread discontent among farming communities is strongly shifting voting trends in traditional agricultural states, opening new political developments, new development strategies, and the future of American agriculture. Facing major disruptions from the Chinese market, American farmers and policymakers are beginning to explore new directions to reduce this dangerous dependency. One key strategy is diversifying export markets. Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America are seen as rapidly expanding potential markets with growing demand for agricultural products. Developing these markets not only reduces risks, but also opens opportunities for sustainable growth of U.S. agriculture in the long term. Moreover, the agriculture sector is focusing on investing in value-added products and food processing. Instead of only exporting raw materials, developing processed products with higher economic value will increase profits and competitiveness globally. Technology also plays a critical role. Applying modern supply chain management technologies like blockchain helps ensure product origin and quality, while enhancing operational efficiency and transparency in international trade. The future of American agriculture requires a stable multilateral trade strategy that avoids volatile tariff policies. Innovation in technology and market diversification are the keys to maintaining competitiveness and sustainable development amid today's complex geopolitical environment. Walmart reports a 4.5% increase in sales growth, but also warns of major price hikes due to Trump-era tariffs. The Walmart CEO says the company can no longer absorb the pressure, and American consumers, especially in red regions, will be hit hardest. Price hike warning. Walmart has just issued a warning that product prices are set to rise sharply in the near future, with the primary cause being the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on imported goods. Although Walmart's revenue has increased by 4.5% compared to the same period last year, CEO Doug McMillon stated that the company can no longer absorb the rising costs from these tariffs. Given its massive scale and presence in nearly every region, Walmart simply cannot continue to absorb these higher costs without adjusting prices. This means consumers will be the ones bearing the burden of these changes. American consumers will face the direct consequences of these tariff policies. In particular, people living in red areas, where Walmart holds a dominant market share, will feel the impact most acutely. In these regions, Walmart is not only the most popular store, but often the only source for essential items like food, diapers, and medication. As prices for these necessities rise, residents in these areas, who often lack alternative options, will be hit the hardest. These tariffs don't just influence the price of products, they directly affect the daily lives of people who rely on Walmart for basic necessities. As a result, their standard of living is clearly impacted. In the end, consumers in these regions will be forced to pay more for the essentials, an outcome they can hardly avoid. Tariffs and the consumer impact. When people hear the word tariffs, many assume it's a tool to make other countries pay more, but the reality is quite different. Tariffs aren't costs paid by foreign nations. They're ultimately borne by American consumers. Major retailers like Walmart cannot continue absorbing all the increased costs from tariffs and are forced to raise product prices to compensate. Walmart, with its strong presence in rural areas and red regions, where support for tariff policies is often highest, will be the first place consumers feel the impact of rising prices. Essential everyday items like food, baby diapers, and medicine, products that most families depend on, will become more expensive. In these areas, Walmart isn't just a popular store. It's often the only store offering these necessities. As prices go up, residents have no choice but to accept higher costs. That's why these communities become the hardest hit by tariff policies. With no affordable alternatives available, they face growing financial pressure, increasing the burden especially on low-income families. Price pressure and the silent long-term effect. Although tariffs on some Chinese goods have been temporarily reduced to 15%, price pressures have not eased. Walmart, like many other retailers, has stated it can no longer absorb losses to maintain old prices, and as a result, it will have to raise product prices. This isn't a sudden shift. It will unfold gradually and quietly. Consumers won't notice it immediately, but over time, they'll feel the rising cost of living. Essential items like food, baby diapers, and medicine, things most families need daily, will become more expensive. In fact, these changes may occur without consumers fully understanding the cause, making them feel the impact only at the checkout. This is a long-term burden consumers will have to bear, one that will slowly strain household budgets across America, especially among low-income families. Who suffers most? And a question to ponder. So, who suffers the most from these tariffs? It's the working class, low-income earners, and especially families in rural areas where Walmart is king. They'll feel the price pressure more than anyone else. And that raises a big question. Do these policies really put American people first, as claimed? The answer might make you rethink everything. Ask yourself, is this a war over money, where the American consumer is the real loser? Did you know that cargo shipments through U.S. ports have dropped by up to 40%? Over 10,000 containers are now frozen, unable to leave the ports. So, what's really happening to cause this sharp slowdown in American exports? Severe decline at ports and its causes. Major U.S. ports like Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Seattle, once hubs of international trade, are now experiencing a sharp drop in container volumes. A 25 to 40% decline within just a few weeks is unprecedented, clearly signaling serious disruptions in the supply chain. The main cause isn't reduced consumer demand, but extremely high tariffs, up to 145%, primarily on imports from China. These tariffs have imposed such heavy costs that many businesses have been forced to pause or drastically cut back imports to avoid financial losses. This stall means goods aren't moving or being unloaded, leaving ports empty and machinery like cranes idle. Workers are laid off or face reduced hours, directly impacting labor forces and paralyzing the entire logistics network. The disruption affects not just individual companies, but ripples through the entire U.S. economy, since ports are the gateway to global supply chains. When ports freeze, international trade grinds to a halt, triggering widespread consequences across production, distribution, and domestic consumption. As policies begin to shift, a new wave of goods will flood in. But can the port system and supply chains handle this surge? This is the next major challenge facing U.S. logistics. Recovery opportunities and major challenges. In mid-May, tariffs were reduced to 30% for a 90-day period, creating a short-term window for businesses to accelerate imports. Retailers and logistics companies immediately ramped up orders to prepare for back-to-school and year-end holiday seasons. However, ports and transportation systems can't bounce back instantly after a long freeze. Cranes that had stopped working need to be restarted, laid-off workers or those who switch careers must be rehired, and equipment requires thorough maintenance before stable operations resume. This limits short-term cargo handling capacity. Moreover, shipping from China to the U.S. takes between 3 to 6 weeks. Goods will flood the ports simultaneously while the system is still rebooting, causing severe congestion at docks, warehouses, and related logistics networks. This creates immense pressure on the entire supply chain, forcing carriers and ports to struggle with the sudden surge in volume while resources and infrastructure remain under-recovered. This directly impacts nationwide product availability and delays many commercial activities. Long-term consequences and economic impact. The ongoing instability and frequent changes in tariff policies have left businesses unable to predict or plan for the long term. This is especially damaging to small businesses, which lack the financial resources and flexibility to quickly adapt to sudden shifts. It's not just companies that suffer. Logistics workers are deeply affected as well. Port workers and truck drivers face irregular hours, uncertain income, and prolonged job insecurity. These disruptions reduce operational efficiency and create social stress within the transportation sector. Supply chains, originally designed for stable and continuous operation, have turned into a gamble where every decision is shadowed by policy and market uncertainty. This situation not only disrupts trade, but also drives costs higher, directly impacting prices and consumers' purchasing power. In the long run, the U.S. economy risks losing its competitive edge in exports. Trade partners and investors may view the business environment as unstable, which could hinder capital flow and overall economic growth. Ports' inability to quickly handle surges in cargo volume will worsen congestion, delay deliveries, increase logistics costs, and damage the entire supply chain, from manufacturers to end consumers. Over 1,500 John Deere workers in the U.S. lost their jobs within weeks. Thousands of parts are blocked due to Canada's tightened export policies, crippling the supply chain during peak season. John Deere, an American agricultural icon, is facing a serious crisis. Do you think this will impact the entire U.S.? Canada tightens exports, triggering John Deere and farmer crisis. John Deere, the steadfast symbol of American agriculture, is facing an unprecedented crisis. Did you know that in just a few weeks, thousands of workers at U.S. plants have lost their jobs? All because of one move by Canada, tightening exports of critical parts and nearly paralyzing John Deere's long-standing supply chain. What's remarkable is that Canada didn't need threats or loud protests. They simply tweaked a small clause in export regulations, yet that tiny change created massive barriers. Factories from Iowa to Nebraska had to halt operations, with workers left watching silent machinery unable to run. Can you imagine bustling showrooms once filled with green and yellow tractors suddenly going empty? John Deere dealers face severe parts shortages, and farmers, right in the middle of harvest, struggle with broken equipment they can't fix in time. Harvests are disrupted, yields drop, and the livelihoods of millions of American farmers are shaken. Hard to believe, isn't it? Widespread socioeconomic impact and government response. The crisis at John Deere isn't just an agricultural problem, it's triggering a severe ripple effect across rural American communities. Can you imagine? When machinery shortages cause farmers to lose income, who's left to shop at local stores? Countless shops are forced to close due to lack of customers, banks lose revenue and tighten credit, making it even harder for people to get loans. This leads to heavy consequences for local schools. They have to cut budgets and reduce education programs, directly impacting the future of an entire generation. Meanwhile, Midwestern states like Iowa, Michigan, and Ohio are now pleading with Canada for relief while racing to attract foreign investment to salvage the situation. But here's the thing: the federal government still hasn't offered strong enough solutions to turn things around. This is fueling growing frustration and worry among citizens and local leaders. This isn't just an ordinary economic issue, it's a dangerous warning sign for the whole country. Do you think America is facing a crisis far bigger than we realize? Market shift, farmers turning to Chinese and Korean machinery. An unexpected turning point. Many John Deere dealers have started importing machinery from China and South Korea to keep their operations running. Brands once viewed as foreign outsiders are now gradually capturing the rural American market. Companies like BYD, NIO, and Hyundai are seizing this opportunity to rapidly expand their market share. Do you think this shift is just a temporary alternative? Or will it completely reshape the American agricultural landscape? As farmers are forced to choose for survival, this could mark a major turning point, signaling a permanent change. This shift isn't merely a short-term substitution, it's deeply transforming long-held habits and trust among American farmers, heralding a new era in the highly competitive and dynamic agricultural machinery market. Strategic warning, a lesson on economic power and the future of U.S. manufacturing. The John Deere paralysis isn't just an economic incident. It's a stark warning about the economic power wielded by neighboring countries. With a small policy change, Canada has pushed an American manufacturing icon to the brink of collapse. This serves as a reminder that the U.S. must restructure its supply chains and manufacturing strategies if it wants to maintain its global leadership. John Deere. Workers, farmers, and American agriculture stand at a historic crossroads. What do you think? Can the U.S. adapt and revive, or will it lose much of its position in global agriculture? Did you know that tariffs imposed by the Trump administration caused Amazon to lose over $13 billion in profits over just 3 years? Yes, that number sounds shocking, doesn't it? But is it entirely accurate? And what really happened behind the scenes when this e-commerce giant decided to pull out of the United States? Tariffs can be a powerful tool to protect domestic manufacturing and reduce reliance on imports. However, when rates reach as high as 145% on Chinese goods, plus an additional 10% on many other products, it becomes a sharp blade that can cut into profits and raise prices for consumers. Amazon imports roughly 70% of its goods from China, so the rising costs hit them hard. And who ends up paying for that? Exactly, the consumers. Higher prices mean lower purchasing power, which negatively affects domestic consumption. Amazon even planned to disclose the price hikes caused by tariffs, aiming for transparency. But the White House opposed this move, forcing Amazon to keep it quiet. This shows the tension between protectionism and transparency in a market economy. Quite an irony, isn't it? Global supply chains are complex networks optimized for low costs and fast delivery. But high tariffs and new rules, like removing duty exemptions for low-value goods, have shattered that balance. Amazon lost a critical logistics advantage and had to act fast. Their bold move, called the Silver Compass Project, involved shifting global headquarters to places like UAE, Singapore, and Ireland. They're swimming out to deeper waters to preserve profits and remain competitive in a volatile trade policy environment. This shows that tariffs don't just raise prices, they reshape the global economic map as major players relocate to adapt. These shifts also mean jobs and investments are moving away from traditional hubs, creating new economic centers in regions with more favorable trade conditions. Amazon's strategy reflects a broader trend where companies seek stability and predictability amid trade tensions. This constant adaptation is now a necessity for survival in a world of uncertain policies. Ultimately, the global supply chain landscape is being redrawn, with long-lasting effects on international commerce. Seattle, once the booming home base of Amazon's growth, is now feeling the ripple effects. As news of Amazon's exit broke, its stock plunged, housing demand dropped, dragging real estate values down. Small businesses dependent on Amazon employees' spending saw sales fall, facing closures or layoffs. Municipal tax revenues dropped, putting pressure on funding for infrastructure and public services. Thousands of workers now face uncertainty. They must decide whether to relocate or search for new jobs in a shifting market. It's a tough lesson on the risks of urban development relying too heavily on just a few corporate giants. Amazon is not alone in this struggle. Other giants like Apple, Tesla, and Walmart are also reassessing their supply chains and operations to minimize tariff costs and maximize flexibility. The trend of moving production and headquarters overseas to benefit from tax breaks, modern infrastructure, and lower costs is becoming increasingly common. This shifts the balance of economic power between nations and presents a challenge for the U.S. to remain an attractive hub for global corporations. Amazon's exit offers a crucial lesson. High tariffs are not always the best answer. While aiming to protect domestic industries, excessive tariffs can increase production costs, weaken company competitiveness, and push business activities abroad. To retain major corporations and ensure sustainable growth, U.S. policymakers must strike a balance between protecting domestic interests and fostering a favorable business environment that encourages innovation and long-term investment. Adapting to globalization, diversifying supply chains, and enhancing competitiveness are key factors in maintaining the U.S.'s position as an economic leader. $514 billion. That's how much the U.S. Department of the Treasury was forced to borrow in Q2 2025 to cover the massive gap caused by China's dumping of $1.7 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. And what's even more alarming? The U.S. dollar lost nearly 9% of its value immediately after that retreat. China's shocking counterstrike. Overnight, what once seemed unthinkable became reality. China didn't just pull out of the U.S. bond market, it did so at lightning speed. Roughly $1.7 trillion in Treasury bonds were dumped in quick succession. This came immediately after the U.S. government ordered banking giants, J.P. Morgan and Bank of America, to withdraw from a $5 billion IPO of a leading Chinese EV battery company. The reason? national security concerns, and Beijing's rapid rise in strategic technology. But the price? Too high. In just one quarter, the Treasury Department had to boost its borrowing plan to a record $514 billion, more than 4 times the original